Imagine walking into a store just to grab a snack, only to have your entire world flipped upside down in front of a crowd. Now imagine the shock of being handcuffed by the police in that very store, accused of something you didn't do. What would you do? What if you were a billionaire, known for your generosity, yet judged unfairly by everyone around you? This is exactly what happened to Vanessa Green, a CEO worth billions, who turned her public humiliation into a powerful statement for justice. But she didn't just let this moment pass. She used it to spark a nationwide conversation. To see how this story unfolded and how Vanessa transformed adversity into a force for good, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss this incredible journey of resilience, justice, and standing tall in the face of judgment. You won't believe how a simple trip to the grocery store turned into a full-blown humiliation for a billionaire. The sun was high, and the city bustled with energy when a woman named Vanessa Green walked into a local supermarket on the west side of town. Dressed in a sleek designer suit and heels that echoed confidence with every step, Vanessa looked like someone important, but not everyone saw it that way. To the employees and a few customers, she looked too elegant for this neighborhood. Eyes followed her down every aisle as if she didn't belong. She ignored the stares. She was just here to pick up a few snacks before heading to a charity event downtown. What no one knew was that Vanessa Green was the CEO of a global tech empire, worth billions, and a woman who had pulled herself out of poverty through relentless grit. But today, she wasn't a billionaire. She was just a shopper trying to buy some chips and bottled water. As Vanessa strolled down the snack aisle, comparing brands and scanning the ingredients list like any mindful consumer, a store employee near the registers furrowed her brow and whispered to the cashier, "Keep an eye on aisle 4. Something seems off." That whisper sparked a chain reaction. A few moments later, a security guard appeared at the end of the aisle, pretending to restock shelves, eyes locked on Vanessa. She noticed, of course. She always noticed. Growing up in a tough neighborhood taught her how to read people, especially when they misjudged her. But she stayed calm, refusing to give them the reaction they seemed to be hoping for. With her items in hand, she moved toward the self-checkout lane, planning to be in and out within minutes. But before she could scan the first item, a loud voice startled everyone. "Ma'am, can we speak with you for a moment?" 2 police officers, one male and one female, had entered the store and approached her quickly, cutting off her path. The female officer's tone was firm, but already laced with suspicion. "We've received a report of possible theft." Vanessa blinked. "I haven't even scanned anything yet," she replied, confused. The male officer stepped forward, asking her to place her bag on the ground. "What's in the bag?" he demanded. "My personal belongings," she said, now sensing this situation wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was something deeper, something familiar. "Can I see some ID?" he asked, and as Vanessa reached into her purse, the female officer placed a hand on her arm. "Slowly," she warned. The people around them had begun to notice. Phones came out. Murmurs grew louder. One shopper whispered, "She didn't do anything." But no one stepped in. Vanessa handed over her ID, and for a moment, the officers examined it silently. The badge on her ID clearly stated, "Vanessa Green, founder and CEO of Green Tech Innovations." But the officers seemed skeptical. "You expect us to believe this?" the male officer muttered. "This isn't a joke," Vanessa said, keeping her voice even. "You're making a mistake." But the female officer radioed in the ID anyway, as if she expected it to come back fake. While they waited, the male officer made the decision to handcuff Vanessa for safety, claiming it was standard procedure. She protested, calmly but firmly, drawing the attention of even more customers. "I've done nothing wrong," she said. "You're detaining me without cause." But they didn't care. In full view of cameras and witnesses, Vanessa was handcuffed. Like a criminal, her tailored sleeves rolled up roughly, her shopping cart abandoned. The irony wasn't lost on her. Only hours earlier, she had been the keynote speaker at a tech summit, celebrating women of color in leadership. And now here, she was being paraded out of a grocery store like a thief. Outside, the cameras continued rolling. "What's going on here?" someone shouted. Do you even know who that is? A young woman asked, holding up her phone, displaying a photo of Vanessa from a Forbes cover story. That's her, she added. That's Vanessa Green. The officers paused. Confusion flashed across their faces. The name suddenly sounded familiar. The male officer took another look at her ID, then at Vanessa herself, the dots slowly connecting. Wait, are you really the Vanessa Green? He asked, his tone now shaky. Yes, she answered coldly. I tried to tell you. The female officer immediately began fumbling with the cuffs. Ma'am, we're so sorry. We didn't realize. But it was too late. The damage was done. The humiliation had unfolded publicly, and the videos were already spreading online like wildfire. By the time Vanessa got into her car, still, surrounded by onlookers, hashtags like Vanessa Green and Shopping While Black were trending. Reporters had already begun calling her office. Back home, she sat in silence, her assistant staring at her, unsure of what to say. Vanessa didn't cry. She didn't scream. She planned. She thought of every young woman who might go through the same thing without the privilege of name recognition. The next day, Vanessa released a video statement, calm and composed. She detailed every moment, from the suspicious stares to the unjust handcuffing. This wasn't about theft, she said. This was about perception. This was about who they thought I was because of how I look. The response was immediate and explosive. Celebrities, politicians, and business leaders rallied around her. The store issued a formal apology, and the police department launched an internal review. But Vanessa didn't stop there. She announced the creation of the Unseen Voices Foundation, a $30 million initiative aimed at educating law enforcement and businesses on racial bias, proper de-escalation techniques, and the dangers of assumptions. In addition, she offered grants to tech developers creating software for body cams that flag discriminatory behavior in real time. But most powerfully, she toured cities across the country, speaking in schools, on college campuses, and at police academies. Her message was clear. You don't get to decide who someone is based on what they wear, what they look like, or what neighborhood they're in. Months later, the same officers who detained her appeared at one of her workshops, by choice. They sat in the front row, humbled and ready to listen. Vanessa greeted them not with anger but with resolve. This isn't about revenge, she said. It's about making sure this never happens to anyone else. Her dignity throughout the ordeal inspired millions. Young women began posting videos with the caption, "I am Vanessa Green," sharing their own stories of prejudice and profiling. Schools added her story to their diversity curriculum. Lawmakers cited her foundation in proposals for new police reform legislation. What began as humiliation had turned into a national reckoning. And Vanessa stood at the center, not as a victim, but as a leader. And while the world finally saw her for who she was, Vanessa never forgot how quickly people had judged her. It reminded her that success, no matter how great, never makes you immune to injustice. But it also reminded her of her power, and what could be done with it when used not to destroy, but to build, to heal, and to change the system from within. She wasn't just a billionaire. She was a symbol, a force, and to those who thought they could define her with cuffs and suspicion, she gave them something much more powerful to remember her by: change. Vanessa had just reached for a pack of organic veggie chips when a store employee, clearly suspicious, whispered into a walkie-talkie. Moments later, 2 police officers entered the store. They didn't walk. They marched. Straight toward Vanessa. "Ma'am, we've received a report of suspicious activity," one officer said, already reaching for her arm. Vanessa blinked in disbelief. "I'm just shopping," she replied calmly. But they didn't listen. One officer looked her up and down, misjudging her confidence as arrogance. The other officer glanced at her bag, then accused her of shoplifting, without checking security footage, without asking for a receipt. Vanessa tried to explain, even offering to show ID, but they dismissed her words. "Let's sort it out at the station," they said coldly, handcuffing her right there in the aisle between shelves of cereal and cleaning products. Phones came out. People started filming. and the humiliation began. In that single moment, the grocery store transformed into a stage of injustice, and Vanessa, someone who had built a billion-dollar tech empire from nothing, was reduced to a stereotype in the eyes of people who knew nothing about her. Her tailored blazer was creased under the grip of the officer's hand. Her dignity was bruised, not by the cuffs, but by the eyes watching with either curiosity or judgment. No one helped. No one questioned the officers. Some whispered, some recorded, and others simply watched, as if her moment of disgrace was entertainment. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, not because she was afraid, but because of the deep, familiar sting of being profiled. She had escaped poverty, conquered Silicon Valley, and been featured on the cover of magazines. But even that didn't protect her from being treated like a criminal based solely on assumptions. As they led her out of the store, her high heels clicked against the tile floor, echoing through the aisles like a cruel beat to a walk of shame she didn't deserve. A little girl clutched her mother's hand, watching wide-eyed, asking, "What did she do, Mommy?" The mother didn't respond. She just turned away. Outside, the officers placed Vanessa in the back of the squad car, ignoring her calm but firm request to call her lawyer. Inside the store, an employee tried to act busy, avoiding the crowd forming around the self-checkout lane. But one person in the crowd, Marcus, a young freelance journalist who happened to recognize Vanessa, wasn't going to let it go. He pulled up her name online, finding her company website, her latest TED Talk, and an interview she gave just last week about creating opportunities for underserved communities. He quickly shared it on social media, along with the footage he'd captured. This woman just got arrested in a grocery store for allegedly shoplifting. She's a billionaire. Tech CEO, let that sink in, he tweeted. The post exploded. Thousands of retweets within an hour. Influencers, celebrities, and activists joined in. Hashtags like Psych Vanessa Green and the racial profiling spread like wildfire. By the time Vanessa arrived at the police station, her legal team was already on the phone demanding her immediate release. The officer who had accused her glanced nervously at the screen on his desk. The news was already breaking. "Is this the same Vanessa Green who funded the new science center downtown?" someone asked. "She's worth over $4 billion, someone else whispered. Realization started to creep into the room. The officer in charge walked into the interrogation area, visibly shaken, and said, "Ms. Green, I believe there's been a misunderstanding." But Vanessa didn't flinch. No, there wasn't a misunderstanding. There was a judgment. The cuffs were finally removed, but not the weight of what had just happened. Vanessa walked out of the station into a sea of reporters. Cameras flashed, microphones pointed at her. She paused, took a breath, and simply said, "I'll speak when it's time." That evening she returned home, her assistant and legal advisors rallying around her. But Vanessa sat alone for a moment, remembering her childhood in the projects, the nights she studied by candlelight, the first time she coded an app on a broken laptop, and the feeling of pride when she signed her first multi-million-dollar deal. None of that protected her today. She turned on the news and saw herself in handcuffs, her face a symbol of something much larger than her story. The next morning, she held a press conference outside her company headquarters. She stood at the podium, powerful and poised, and addressed the crowd. "Yesterday I was arrested not for stealing, but for existing in a space where people thought I didn't belong," she began. "This is not about me. This is about every person who has ever been followed, judged, or humiliated for who they are instead of what they've done." She announced a new initiative, the Equity Watch, a $50 million program dedicated to training law enforcement and retail staff across the country on implicit bias and respectful engagement. She also offered a $1 million grant competition for tech developers to create bias detection software for security systems. Her company's stock surged as support poured in. The mayor issued a public apology, and the police department launched an internal investigation. Vanessa declined to press charges against the officers, but required them to undergo her program as a condition of settling the incident. Days later, the officers appeared in a photo, sitting in a training session, led by social justice educators funded by her new initiative. That image went viral too, but for a better reason. It was a symbol of change. Schools began teaching Vanessa's story as a modern-day lesson in perseverance, power, and purpose. Young girls wrote letters to her, thanking her for being brave. One girl wrote, "You made me feel like I can be anything, even when the world tells me I can't." Vanessa read every one. She cried, not because she was hurt, but because she knew her pain had created a platform, one that could no longer be ignored. And as she stepped onto the TED stage 6 months later, telling the story in her own words, she said, "They saw a threat, but I was the future, and now I'm making sure the future sees us, all of us." The standing ovation lasted over 2 minutes, but Vanessa wasn't interested in applause. She was interested in justice, and from that moment on, no one dared question who she was again. Not because of her wealth, but because of the legacy she had begun to build from a moment of humiliation that she turned into history. As Vanessa was escorted out of the store, handcuffed and surrounded by flashing cameras, a young man in the crowd gasped, "Wait, isn't that Vanessa Green? The billionaire who just donated $10 million to rebuild city schools?" His words cut through the noise like a blade. A woman nearby pulled up a photo on her phone and showed it to the officers. One of them froze. The resemblance was undeniable. Another bystander confirmed it. Then another. The officers stopped. One of them nervously asked, "Ma'am, are you Vanessa Green?" She nodded, now silent, her expression unreadable. In a matter of seconds, the narrative flipped. From suspect to victim. From humiliation to recognition. One officer began unlocking the cuffs, stammering apologies. "We're sorry. We didn't know." But the damage had been done. The video of the arrest had already gone viral. Headlines were being written before she could even step into her car. Her name trended on every platform within hours, but not for her latest innovation or philanthropic work. This time, it was for being the center of a public injustice. Vanessa sat in the back of her black SUV, hands resting on her lap where the cuffs had just left faint marks on her wrists, looking out the window with a blank stare. Her assistant, who had rushed to the scene after hearing the news, sat beside her in silence. He knew better than to speak. Vanessa's silence was loud. Her driver turned up the volume on the radio, where a breaking news segment was already discussing the incident. Tech mogul Vanessa Green, known for her rags-to-riches story and major contributions to education and technology, was wrongfully detained today while shopping at a local grocery store. Vanessa listened without reacting, her mind already spinning through the implications. She thought about the countless women who didn't have cameras to capture their mistreatment, about the girls who would watch that video and internalize that no amount of success could shield them from prejudice. But Vanessa wasn't one to let pain pass without purpose. She returned home, changed out of her elegant suit, and stepped into her private study, walls lined with books, awards, and photos from every phase of her life. She pulled down a frame with a picture of her younger self, standing in front of a rundown apartment complex, holding a homemade trophy labeled Future CEO. Her eyes welled up, not from sadness, but from fire. She turned to her assistant and said, "Schedule a press conference. I have something to say." The next morning, the world watched as Vanessa stood behind a podium, this time not at a tech summit or charity gala, but in front of a sea of microphones demanding truth. She didn't falter. "Yesterday, I was arrested not because I did anything wrong, but because someone saw me and made a judgment. I am a black woman. I am successful. And I am tired." Her voice carried power, measured, calm, but unshakable. She recounted the moment she was accused, the officer's hand on her wrist, the silence of the store, the look of pity in some eyes and judgment in others. "They didn't know who I was," she continued. "But that's the problem. It shouldn't take a name or a net worth for someone to be treated with dignity." Cameras clicked, reporters scribbled notes, and the internet flooded with support. Celebrities reposted the video, leaders voiced outrage, and everyday people poured into her comments with stories of their own. Painful, raw, similar. Vanessa's inbox overflowed, not with business inquiries, but with confessions, experiences, and gratitude. One message from a teacher read, My students are watching this. You've shown them strength in a way textbooks never could. Vanessa responded, with action. Within days, she launched the See Me campaign, a coalition aimed at confronting implicit bias in retail and law enforcement. Backed by over 20 corporations and nonprofits, it included mandatory training programs, community accountability, forums, and funding for minority-owned businesses disproportionately affected by discrimination. But that was only the beginning. Vanessa didn't just want reform. She wanted transformation. She personally visited the police department involved, in her case not with press but with purpose. She met with the officers, looked them in the eye, and instead of lashing out, she offered education. "You can't fix what you don't face," she told them. One officer, deeply moved, said, "You changed how I see people. You changed how I see myself." Meanwhile, media outlets begged for interviews. Morning shows, talk shows, podcasts, all wanted her story. But Vanessa chose one, a small independent journalist who had posted the first video of her arrest. She told him, "You saw me when no one else did." That interview went viral, not because of the platform, but because of the message. Vanessa spoke not as a billionaire, but as a woman who had lived both sides of the American dream, the struggle and the success, the respect and the rejection. She told her story not for sympathy, but for systemic change. And slowly, things began to shift. The grocery store where she was arrested implemented a complete overhaul of its security and employee training protocols. The chain's CEO reached out personally, not only to apologize but to ask for guidance. Vanessa agreed, on one condition. They fund a diversity and hiring initiative in underserved communities. They said yes. Across the country, people began sharing their own Vanessa Green moments, stories of judgment turned into justice. Her name became more than a trending topic. It became a movement. Schools invited her to speak. Universities added her story to curriculum. Even corporations asked her to consult on equity initiatives. But Vanessa stayed grounded. She continued, working on her company, mentoring young founders, and reminding everyone that success didn't mean invincibility. One day, during a speaking engagement at a high school, a student asked, "If you could go back and stop that day from happening, would you?" Vanessa paused, looked around the packed auditorium and said, "No, because that moment gave birth to a message louder than any I'd shared before." It showed the world that no matter how far we rise, we're still seen through the lens of someone else's bias. But it also proved that when we speak, the world listens. And with that, she walked off stage to a thunderous ovation, not as a victim, but as a voice, a force for change. A woman who turned her most humiliating moment into a revolution that reminded millions they too deserved to be seen, heard, and respected. Not because of who they are in the spotlight, but because of who they are when no one's watching. Back in her office hours later, Vanessa sat in silence. Not because she was embarrassed, but because she was planning. The incident at the supermarket had shaken something deep within her, not because it hurt her ego, but because it reminded her of a truth she had known her whole life, that the world often sees only skin, not substance, and that too many people are punished not for what they've done, but for how they appear. She had spent her career breaking barriers, but this moment was a brutal reminder that even with billions in the bank, a private jet on standby, and buildings named after her, she could still be reduced to a stereotype in seconds. Vanessa wasn't angry, she was focused. This wasn't just about a wrongful accusation. It was about the millions of people who face judgment, humiliation, and violence simply because they were born in bodies the world mistrusts. So she did what visionaries do. She turned pain into purpose. She called her communications team, her legal advisors, her public relations director, and her community outreach leads. "I want a full press conference tomorrow morning," she said. "No blame, no lawsuits, just truth." And that's exactly what happened. Dressed in a simple navy dress, her hair pulled back, Vanessa stood behind the podium, cameras flashing, reporters hanging on every word. She began not with outrage, but with a calm, chilling retelling of the events. "Yesterday," she said, "I was mistaken for a criminal while buying chips and water. Not because I acted suspiciously, Not because I broke any laws, but because I didn't look like someone they expected to shop in that neighborhood. The room was dead silent. Then she asked, "How many people would have suffered this same treatment if they didn't have cameras, wealth, or recognition?" It was a question that didn't just point fingers, it held up a mirror. Within minutes, the moment went viral again. But this time it wasn't the footage of her arrest. It was her voice, her composure, her call to conscience. Vanessa didn't stop there. She announced the launch of the Green Equity Fund, pledging $25 million to a national initiative aimed at training police departments and retail staff in cultural sensitivity, racial bias recognition, and de-escalation tactics. It would be a mandatory program, offered free of charge, with an ambitious goal: to create an environment where the dignity of every individual is protected, regardless of race, background, or wealth. Vanessa's plan didn't stop at awareness, it demanded accountability. The fund would also establish an independent oversight board made up of activists, educators, law enforcement veterans, and community members to review cases of racial profiling and recommend reforms. "This isn't about bad people," she said during her speech. "It's about broken systems, and we don't fix them by pretending they don't exist. We fix them by facing them, funding solutions, and refusing to be silent." Her words ignited a national conversation that spilled into homes, classrooms, offices, and government chambers. Talk shows debated it, podcasts broke it down, and influencers with millions of followers challenged their audiences to look inward. School teachers began holding discussions about Vanessa's story. Police departments from cities big and small started requesting access to the green training modules. Even members of Congress applauded her efforts, with some introducing proposals to adopt similar training standards at the federal level. Meanwhile, Vanessa didn't stop working. She toured cities. She sat in on police training sessions. She visited community centers and listened to the voices of those who had endured the same humiliation she had. Only theirs didn't go viral. At every stop, she reminded people, "This story went public because I'm famous, but this happens every single day to people who aren't. And that's why I'm here." She met with single mothers, ex-convicts trying to start over, teenagers who had already been profiled multiple times. And she didn't just listen, she took notes, she asked questions, she invited them to be part of the solution, she hired them, she empowered them, she made them part of the movement. Her actions created ripples everywhere. Companies updated their employee conduct policies. Police departments integrated new community liaison positions. Educational institutions introduced new coursework on systemic bias and identity-based discrimination. The Green Equity Fund quickly grew beyond its initial $25 million as other philanthropists and corporations pitched in, inspired by her example. 1 year later, Vanessa stood in front of a room full of graduates, the first class to complete the nationwide Respect and Action law enforcement program she had funded. There were tears in the room. One officer, who admitted he once held biases he didn't even recognize, thanked her for changing the way he saw the people he served. Vanessa smiled but remained grounded. She knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. That night, as she returned home and sat in her living room, Vanessa looked out over the city skyline. The lights below didn't just represent a bustling metropolis. To her, they were windows into stories, millions of lives trying to be seen, understood, respected. She thought about the moment in that grocery store, the weight of the cuffs, the sting of judgment, the flood of stares, and how that pain had led to purpose. She thought about her younger self again, the girl who once stood barefoot in a cracked parking lot, holding a plastic trophy and daring to dream. And now, she wasn't just building a tech empire. She was building a legacy rooted in justice, empathy, and fearless truth-telling. In a world that often tried to reduce her to labels, billionaire, black woman, CEO, suspect, Vanessa had redefined them all. And she did it not by shouting louder, but by speaking with conviction, by leading with compassion, and by refusing to let one humiliating moment define her. Instead, she turned it into a national reckoning, into reform, into hope. And long after the cameras moved on and the headlines faded, the impact of her choice, to use her platform not to punish, but to build, would echo across the country, transforming how people saw one another, one conversation, one policy, one heart at a time. Vanessa Green didn't respond with anger, didn't file a lawsuit, and she didn't demand revenge, even though everything about the way she had been treated in that grocery store screamed for some kind of retribution. What she chose to do, in the face of humiliation and public scrutiny, was something far more powerful. She turned her personal torment into hope for others. It wasn't a grand, sweeping gesture, but one that resonated with every individual who had ever felt judged, misunderstood, or wrongly accused. After the shocking and public incident where she, a billionaire CEO of a global tech empire, had been handcuffed in the aisles of a local supermarket by two officers who had falsely accused her of shoplifting, Vanessa could have reacted in a dozen different ways. The public was already clamoring for her to make a spectacle of it, demanding that she take legal action, or calling for her to wield her power to punish those who had wronged her. But instead, she did the unthinkable. She used her voice not to strike back, but to build something that could spark change for others facing the same injustices. The officers who had been so quick to judge her based on her appearance, their presumptions rooted in unconscious bias, issued a public apology, acknowledging their mistake and their role in the false arrest. And to their credit, they didn't just apologize. There was a shift in their actions. They agreed to be part of the very program that Vanessa had decided to champion, a program that would aim to teach police officers around the country about cultural sensitivity, racial bias, and de-escalation tactics. It was a bold step forward in what would become a larger movement for change, but it wasn't the only ripple effect. The store where the incident had unfolded, a chain that probably never imagined it would be in the headlines for all the wrong reasons, issued a statement of regret. They too became part of Vanessa's vision. They joined her corporate accountability initiative, pledging to do more to address the biases within their own staff, and to foster an environment where every customer, regardless of their background or appearance, could feel safe and respected. Meanwhile, the video of the incident, which had initially captured the shocking and humiliating arrest of a woman whose only crime was shopping while confident and powerful, exploded on the internet. In just 3 days, it had racked up over 10 million views. The video was everywhere. News outlets replayed it. Social media users shared it, dissected it, and sparked conversation after conversation about the assumptions that had led to her wrongful treatment. And in the comments section, something remarkable happened. There was a wave of support. There was outrage, of course, at how someone of Vanessa's stature had been treated like a common criminal, but there was also something else. There was, a collective reflection, an understanding that this was not just about one individual or one bad moment. It was a stark, undeniable reminder of how easy it was for someone to be treated unjustly based on their appearance, their background, or how they presented themselves in public. In the face of all of this, Vanessa remained calm, poised, and remarkably graceful. She didn't seek out the spotlight. She didn't lash out at those who had caused her humiliation. Instead, she handled the situation with a quiet dignity that spoke volumes about her character. She used the attention that had been thrust upon her to make a point that would stick with people long after the incident had faded from the headlines. It wasn't wealth or fame that defined her. It was how she used her voice when the world tried to silence it, how she used her influence to speak out against a system that too often allowed people to be profiled, misunderstood, or cast aside because of their appearance. Vanessa's grace in many ways became the real story, not just the shocking incident itself. She became a symbol of dignity, resilience, and purpose. What was most profound was the way she didn't let the situation define her, but rather she defined the situation. Instead of being a victim, she became an agent of change. Instead of letting the humiliation break her, she allowed it to become the foundation for something larger, something that could change lives. And while Vanessa never sought attention, she reminded the world of an undeniable truth. Respect should never be something that you have to earn through your bank balance, your status, or your name. It should be something that every human being is entitled to by virtue of their humanity. Her actions sparked a deeper conversation about how society views individuals based on preconceived notions and stereotypes. She highlighted the biases that are ingrained in systems across the board, from law enforcement to corporate America. Through the work she would go on to do, with the police training and the accountability initiatives she launched, Vanessa Green became a figure of not just innovation, but of justice. She showed that true power isn't just about what you have or what you've achieved. It's about how you wield that power to lift others up, to challenge the status quo, and to create a better world for everyone. Her name no longer stood just for technological breakthroughs or financial success. It became synonymous with standing up for what's right, for creating real change, and for always standing tall, even when the world tries to bring you low. And in that, she became far more than just a billionaire CEO. She became a voice for the voiceless, a beacon of hope for those who had been silenced, and a reminder to us all that we all have the power to transform adversity into something greater. And that's how Vanessa Green took a moment of humiliation and turned it into a powerful catalyst for change. Her story is a reminder that true strength isn't just about wealth or status, but about using your platform for justice, dignity, and equality. If you were inspired by her journey, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss another story that's not just about success, but about standing up for what's right. Thanks for watching, and remember, your voice matters, no matter who you are. See you in the next video.